Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, building a good character is part of optimization, but the other part of optimization is playing that character tactically well. Today, I want to talk about one of the best spells in D&D for its level, and that's the Web spell. Web spell is a really good spell. I've seen it win combats, but you know what? I've also seen it be relatively ineffective. Today, I'm going to be going over how to use Web to get the most from it. And I'm also going to go over when Web isn't the right spell to cast. This channel is supported by some amazing patrons. I want to thank some of my top level patrons today. Adam D. Bell, Airhead, Alex Oquendo Vang, Alexander Baldwin, Alex R., Rob Reichelt, Awesome Face, Barbar, Ben Potts, Benjamin, Black, Bloody Nine, Brett McDowell, Atherazone, CJ, Chris Coons, Christian Wyndham, Unknown Watcher, Kalinta, Daniel Sturgeon, Dank Train, Dash Panther, Dave Peters, David Edgar, and David F. Thank you all so much for your support. If you would like to check out my Patreon, it is linked in the video description. So Web. It's a second level spell, 1 action casting time, 60-foot range, lasts up to 1 hour using your concentration. So what happens is you conjure a mass of thick, sticky webbing at a point of your choice within range. The webs fill a 20-foot cube from that point for the duration. The webs are difficult terrain and lightly obscure the area. If the webs aren't anchored between two solid masses, such as walls or trees, or layered across a floor, wall, or ceiling, the conjured web collapses on itself, and the spell ends at the start of your next turn. Webs layered over a flat surface have a depth of 5 feet. Each creature that starts its turn in the webs, or enters them during its turn, must make a dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, the creature is restrained as long as it remains in the webs or until it breaks free. A creature restrained by the webs can use its action to make a strength check against your spell save DC, and if it succeeds, it's no longer restrained. The webs are flammable. Any 5-foot cube of webs exposed to fire burn away in 1 round, dealing 2d4 fire damage to any creature that starts its turn in the fire. So, just from the description, I want to just make a couple notes. First, webs don't block vision. I get asked all the time whether webs are blocking sight. It says here in the spell description, they lightly obscure an area. Second, web doesn't say anything about being a physical barrier. So you can fire arrows through it, you can cast spells through it, it's not really blocking anything but movement. And you know what? It's not even necessarily blocking movement. If you use your movement on your turn to move into a web, yeah, there's a saving throw, and even if you make it, you are still dealing with difficult terrain. But force movement doesn't seem to be blocked or slowed or reduced at all. There's also some weird stuff. So, like if a Glamour Bard uses Mantle of Inspiration to give you movement as a reaction, you could walk into a web, and since it's not your turn, you wouldn't need to make a saving throw. Another thing to note is that when you cast a spell, the enemies in the area are not immediately restrained. Until their turn comes up, they're not restrained. Their turn needs to come up, and they need to fail a saving throw. Until then, they're just in the area, but they are not restrained. So, let's say web was cast on you and your party. And then the Glamour Bard comes up next and uses Mantle of Inspiration. Well, everyone but the Bard could just walk out of the web without needing to make a saving throw. So what makes web so good? Well, it isn't that it restrains enemies. We could restrain enemies with a first level spell. Entangle, similar size, first level spell, restrains enemies. What makes web special is that the effect stays in place, so we can use it to restrain enemies long after the spell was cast. Creatures can get restrained in a web once, or twice, or 3 times, or even more. And if a creature wants to escape the web, they need to use an action to make an ability check to free themselves. Except there's no guarantee that that's going to be successful. And if a creature does get restrained more than once, they can lose a whole combat worth of turns trying to escape it. And if a creature is outside a web, but we have the ability to move it into the web before its turn, then at the start of its turn it's going to have to make a saving throw or be restrained. So web also really does well if we have force movement in our party. But you know what? Web does have some failings. And if you're planning to use it with your spellcaster, it's a good idea to know what they are before you find out the hard way. First, let's cover some basics. According to the spell, the web fills a 20-foot cube, but if they aren't anchored between two solid masses or layered across a floor, ceiling, or wall, then the web collapses on itself and ends at the start of your next turn. So, if we cast web here, we have some trees here, we have a wall, we could probably use those to anchor the web, so we can have it fill a 20-foot cube. But if we were to say put it here, then we need to layer it on the ground, in which case it's 5 feet tall. But that's fine as long as we're fighting creatures on the ground. But there is actually one more option, because the web spell doesn't say you have to cast it on a solid surface. It just says that if you don't, then it collapses on itself and the spell ends, but not until the start of your next turn. So let's say we have some flying enemies, and let's say they're 50 feet up, so they're within our range, so we can cast web. On the start of their turn, they're going to need to make saving throws, and if they fail, they're restrained. Now, a creature that's restrained has its speed dropped to 0. According to the rules, if you're flying and your speed drops to 0, unless you have the hover property, you fall. So if these Bone Devils were to fail their save, they would fall 50 feet, that's 5d6 falling damage, then they fall prone. The question is, how effective is that? And really, it depends. These creatures are only going to be making one saving throw, and if they make it, then all we've done is we've slowed their movement slightly for a single turn. Because once that saving throw is made or failed, on their next turn, that web will be gone. So these are the things I would be considering. First, this is the biggest one. How big a problem is it that these creatures are flying? Is this something that you need to solve? I mean, if you have range attacks, then maybe pulling them out of the air isn't even valuable to you. If them flying is a big problem for you and your party, then web is going to be a lot better. Next thing I'd be considering is who's going next? Because let's say you pull both these creatures out of the air with your web spell, and then they go next. Well, they're just going to get up and they're going to fly away again. And then you did a small amount of damage, I guess, from falling. Otherwise, you didn't really solve anything. If flying was a big problem you needed to solve, well, they're flying again, immediately, on their turn. So we didn't really get what we wanted there. Third thing I'd be considering is, what kind of attacks do these creatures do? Like in this case, Bone Devils don't have ranged attacks. So if they're 50 feet up, well, they're either coming down on their own, or they aren't attacking. Now, if we're trying to prevent them from maybe escaping, well, that's one thing. But if they were attacking anyways, casting web here to get them out of the sky might actually not accomplish anything. Finally, how likely is the creature to make the saving throw? Because again, in this situation, we only have one shot. Now, you don't need to look up monster statistics, and as a player, you should never do that anyways. But you know what? We don't need to get a lot of information, because we can just pay attention to what we're fighting. This is a Bone Devil. Do we think it has a decent dexterity score? I would say so. And something I know about devils is a lot of them have magic resistance. So I suspect there's a good chance that it's going to be making that single saving throw with some kind of bonus and with advantage. So, you know what? If it's super important to bring these devils down from flight, it's maybe worth taking that chance. But if not, this is probably the wrong spell, in the wrong place, against the wrong enemy, and it's likely going to be disappointing. Next, let's talk fire. Web is flammable. Different DMs run this in different ways. So we have these two trolls. They're entangled in a web spell. Let's say we cast Firebolt at one of them. Depending on your DM, some may say if you target the creature, but not the web doesn't catch fire. In these cases, basically, unless the web is specifically targeted, or we catch it in an area of effect like a fireball or something, you should be fine. Others may say that the web catches fire but only burns away in the spaces occupied by the creature that was hit. In those cases, we can salvage most of the web, so it's still not a huge problem. Others may say the entire web catches fire. I've seen all of these rulings. And regardless of which of these your DM does, one thing we know is if the web catches fire, the creature that starts its turn in the area takes 2d4 fire damage. There's been some debate as to whether you take 2d4 damage or 2d4 damage per 5-foot section of burning web you're exposed to. Now, according to Jeremy Crawford, he says the web spell in D&D creates a flammable web. If you set the web on fire, any creature that starts its turn in the fire, regardless of the creature's size, take 2d4 fire damage. So this is basically saying it doesn't matter how many squares are on fire. If the entire web is on fire and you've got, a gargantuan creature in that entire web, according to Jeremy Crawford, that's 2d4 damage. That damage is not stacking with itself when we're in multiple squares. And web that catches fire burns away in 1 round. So we still might actually get some benefit from the web after it catches fire. But once again, what makes web special is that the effect stays in place, so we can use it to restrain enemies long after the spell was cast. Creatures can be restrained in a web once, twice, 3 times or more. This means that if you burn your web away, then you're not getting that kind of value. And that's something we need to consider as well. Now, these trolls are unlikely to be able to create fire, but what if it is a creature that can create fire? What if it's something like a red dragon? Well, that web, we're likely only going to get 1 round of use out of it because that dragon can easily set it on fire. But if it's you or your allies that are burning webs that are still working in your favor, then you are removing value from the spell. Here are some other factors you need to consider before you cast web. So the area of a web isn't that big. It's 20 feet across, and that's a fair amount smaller than, say, a hypnotic pattern or a fireball or any number of other spells. Is that smaller size going to be an advantage, a disadvantage, or make no difference? In this case here, we can get both our enemies. But let's say our enemies are like here. Well, now we can't get them both in the web. Is web our only option here? Do we have a spell that could affect both of them, and is that a better option? Here's another thing to consider. Are we going to have ways to move creatures that escape the web back into it? Like, do we have a warlock with repelling blast? Or a fighter that's good at grappling and shoving? Or a swarmkeeper ranger? Because if these creatures escape the web and we have no way to get them back in, then the web might do okay if they fail that initial saving throw, but we're definitely getting reduced value. And keep in mind, force movement that moves things 5 feet, like say the telekinetic feat, is only going to be of help if the creature is right outside the effect. If it moves further away, then we're unlikely to be able to push it back in using that. Here's another thing you should consider. How good is restrained against this specific enemy? Restrained gives us 4 things. We reduce the creature's speed to 0, they have disadvantage on their attacks, we have advantage on our attacks, and it has disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. The big 3 here are the movement speeds of 0 and the disadvantage on their attack rolls and the advantage on our attack rolls. Against these trolls, that's going to be a massive advantage to us. Here's some mages. So we web them. How big an advantage is it that they have a movement speed of 0? Well, not much actually, because they cast spells with range, so they may not need to move. How big an advantage is it, them having disadvantage on their attack rolls? Well, most of their spells don't involve attack rolls, so they'll probably just use those spells. So we've already lost a fair amount of the advantages of web, even before they cast Misty Step to escape. So we cast this on the wrong enemy, now we had basically a pretty big waste of a spell slot and our action. So here's a couple wraiths. How good is web here? Well, they're literally called wraiths. So guess what? Immune to the restrain condition. And the thing is, we didn't need to look in the monster manual to guess that. Look, here's a wraith. Could we have guessed that it's immune to the restrain condition? I mean, you can't always predict what creatures are immune, but you often can. So you wasted your turn and your spell slot. So here we've cast web on a couple wights, except they made their saving throws or broke free, and instead of moving towards us, they backed out. Now they're firing their longbows at the party. Our fighter can't get to them without entering the web. Our paladin can't get to them without going through the web. Unless we have some method to pull these wights back into the web spell is actually working against us. Spell effects don't choose a side to support. It's up to us to use them to help our group rather than to hinder it. In this case, it's time to accept we failed to control this enemy, and now we're just controlling our own party. It's time to drop the spell. Another consideration. Web is an area of effect spell. So ideally, we're going to get multiple creatures with it. But What if we're just fighting one creature? Is it worth it? Well, it can be. If that creature is reliant on attack rolls, benefits from movement, and we have ways to get that creature back into the web if it escapes, then yes, it can be absolutely worth it. But otherwise, this might not be the right spell for this situation. So again, web is a great spell, but only if you use it correctly. You need to know when to use it and when not to use it. If you cast without considering these things, you're going to find out that web is like, a tool in a toolbox. And it's a good tool, but you as the caster need to pick the right tool for the right job if you want to get the most out of casting spells. This was a shorter video. I hope it was helpful to you. If you have any tips for using web effectively, I would love to hear about it in the comments down below. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.